Welcome to Somnus Historia, where the world slows down and history whispers you to sleep. Tonight, let go of the day, not into dreams, but into quiet stories. Stories tucked behind heavy curtains and polished doors. Not of kings or presidents, but of the women beside them, guiding history with silence, with sorrow, and sometimes just with a smile. My name is Lilian, and I invite you to rest as we wander into the hidden chambers of the White House, where power was present but never hers, where every breath, every gown, every glance carried meaning. Now, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where and when are you listening from? Your quiet presence means more than you know. You may have seen their portraits, but did you ever wonder what their mornings felt like? When the only sound was polished shoes on polished floors, and every move, every breath was a message to the nation. So close your eyes and drift back in time to a life always visible, yet never truly seen. Imagine waking before sunrise in the most famous residence in America. The air is still, silent. Outside your window, the south lawn stretches in careful symmetry, an orderly world that you're expected to maintain, reflect, and enhance. Your day begins not with leisure, but with a review of notes from your chief of staff. There are guests arriving from 3 countries today. Your dress has been selected, your hair appointment scheduled. You don't make these decisions alone anymore, or at least you're not expected to. You sip your tea. The china is bone white, trimmed in gold. Chosen not for comfort, but because it was photographed well last year during a luncheon with the Prime Minister's wife. You are, in essence, a living portrait, a national emblem in heels. And yet this role comes with no job description, no official salary, no formal power. Still, the expectations are enormous. You must be elegant but not frivolous, strong but not threatening, engaged but never opinionated, unless your cause is deemed safe enough. The morning continues with a tightly scripted event, perhaps a tour for school children, or a garden ceremony for military families. Your smile must remain gentle, not too wide, not too cool. You've practiced this in the mirror once, maybe more than once. Your posture matters, so does the angle of your chin when you speak. Every camera is watching. Every whisper in the press room has the power to become tomorrow's headline. The most trivial choice, a ribbon color, a Christmas ornament, a meal served during a luncheon, can become a matter of national debate. Later in the day, you'll meet with a group of volunteers. They admire you. They call you gracious. But behind your nods and handshakes, you're aware of a headache that's been pulsing since noon. You haven't eaten. There wasn't time. Now, imagine needing a walk, some air. But stepping outside isn't simple. Security clears the garden paths. An agent shadows you silently. Every movement has been cleared, scheduled, reviewed. In the evening, you host a dinner.
The state dining room gleams with candlelight. Florists have arranged the tables with seasonal blooms. Silverware is aligned with military precision. But you can't taste the food. You must speak, smile, toast the alliance, sit straight, laugh at the right moments. Even your seat has meaning. Where you were placed beside your guests sends subtle signals to the press, to diplomats, to the American public. And when the evening ends, when the final guest has departed, and the staff begin to clear the glassware, you remove your shoes, you return to the East Wing, to your private residence, which feels less like a home and more like a stage without an audience. You may write in your journal, or read, or think about the cause you wish you could speak more loudly about: children's health, or civil rights, or education reform. But you'll wait, because if you speak too soon, too forcefully, you'll be told you're out of line, that you're not the president, just the first lady. It's a strange in-between space, not quite public, not quite private, powerful but often voiceless, respected but often mocked. And tomorrow it all begins again. A fresh list of visitors, a new series of polite gestures, a new day in the life of someone meant to embody the nation's ideals, while rarely being asked what she believes. But not every First Lady accepted these rules. Some found quiet ways to push back, to reshape the role, to whisper change into the ears of a nation. In the next segment, we'll meet one such woman. She walked among the poorest, spoke to the forgotten, and became one of the most influential women in American history without ever holding elected office. Let us now move softly into the life of Eleanor Roosevelt and discover how power, when wielded quietly, can echo for generations.
The story of Eleanor Roosevelt does not begin with greatness. It begins with loss, with silence, and with the slow shaping of a quiet resilience. Born in 1884 into a world of privilege shadowed by personal tragedy, Eleanor's early years were not filled with joy. She lost her mother at the age of 8, her brother soon after, and then her beloved father, whose affection had been both her comfort and her sorrow. She was sent away to boarding school in England, where, far from her turbulent family, she began to discover herself. Her childhood had taught her that love could disappear, that smiles could be masks, and that women were often expected to shrink beneath their husbands' ambitions. But in the solitude of those school corridors, Eleanor found her voice, quiet, reflective, and yearning for purpose. When she returned to New York, she entered the whirl of high society. Debutante balls, formal dinners, polite conversations, all the rituals expected of a Roosevelt niece. But Eleanor was not like the other young women of her class. She did not hunger for fashion or flirtation or the approval of newspapers. She volunteered in the settlement houses of the Lower East Side. She taught immigrant children. She walked through neighborhoods her peers preferred to avoid. And slowly, in silence, she began learning about the world that existed outside the chandeliers and cocktail parlors of the elite. This was the world of America's invisible citizens, people who lived in crowded tenements, who worked long hours for pennies, who spoke little English but dreamed the same dreams. She married her distant cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1905. At the wedding stood Eleanor's uncle, the formidable Theodore Roosevelt,
then President of the United States. His presence cast a political shadow that would follow her all her life. But Eleanor, despite her famous name, did not imagine herself at the heart of politics, not then. Her husband, charming and ambitious, was expected to rise. She was expected to follow. And she did, at first. She bore 6 children, 5 of whom survived. She hosted teas. She smiled in photographs. She did what was expected. But beneath the surface, a different woman was beginning to take shape. In 1921, Franklin was struck by polio. He lost the use of his legs. It was a turning point, not just for him, but for Eleanor. As Franklin retreated into himself, grappling with illness and uncertainty, Eleanor stepped forward. She did not merely nurse him, she became his political eyes and ears. She traveled in his place, attended meetings, visited hospitals, and spoke with union workers. She took notes, reported back, and slowly grew into a figure far more powerful than anyone expected. In an age when women were still expected to remain silent in the public sphere, Eleanor was listening, deeply, attentively, to the voice of the people. Their marriage, too, was not as it appeared. In 1918, Eleanor discovered Franklin's affair with her social secretary, Lucy Mercer. The revelation devastated her, but she did not collapse. She made a quiet, personal decision. She would remain in the marriage for the sake of the children and his political future, but she would never again be a wife in the conventional sense. In that moment, something shifted. Her role in the public eye might still be First Lady, but Eleanor Roosevelt had begun to write her own script. When Franklin was elected president in 1932, the nation was in crisis. The Great Depression had crushed millions. Soup lines curled around city blocks. Banks had collapsed. Families lived in makeshift tents. And there, in the White House, stood Eleanor, nervous, reluctant, but resolved. She was the First Lady now, but she would not be a decorative hostess. She would not fade into the background. She began holding press conferences exclusively for female reporters, forcing newspapers to hire women journalists if they wanted access. She wrote a daily newspaper column titled My Day, in which she chronicled her thoughts, her travels, and the people she met. She answered letters from ordinary Americans, thousands of them, and kept a file of the ones that moved her most. She traveled constantly, often alone, crisscrossing the country to witness the effects of the Depression firsthand. She visited coal miners in West Virginia, sharecroppers in the South, and wounded soldiers in overcrowded veterans hospitals. She insisted on meeting people face to face without fanfare. No aides, no red carpets, just Eleanor in a plain dress, listening quietly. She saw the inequality, the pain, the exhaustion, and she did not turn away. In the segregated South, she defied custom by sitting between black and white audience members. In a time of fear and conformity, she reached out to the forgotten, the misunderstood, the unloved. She championed causes that were often unpopular: civil rights, labor unions, child welfare, public housing. Her critics called her radical. They accused her of overstepping, of meddling in affairs unfit for a First Lady. But Eleanor knew something they didn't. She understood the power of being underestimated. She understood that a woman without official authority could still shape history, one visit, one letter, one speech at a time. When Franklin died in 1945, Eleanor thought her public life was over. But fate had other plans. President Truman appointed her as a delegate to the newly formed United Nations. There, amid the ruins of World War II, she took on one of the greatest challenges of her life, chairing the committee that would draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was a task of immense complexity, bringing together voices from across the globe, balancing competing ideologies, languages, and traditions. But Eleanor was relentless. She negotiated, persuaded, and inspired. She believed, fiercely, that dignity was not the privilege of the few, but the right of all. On December 10, 1948, in Paris, the Universal Declaration was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. It was a moment of quiet triumph, and there, standing in the shadows of that historic vote, was Eleanor Roosevelt, no longer just a First Lady, but a moral voice for humanity. She continued working for decades after. She chaired commissions, wrote books, gave speeches, and mentored young activists. She lived modestly, never seeking riches, never claiming more than her quiet corner of history. When she passed away in 1962, the world mourned not just a political figure, but a woman who had lived in the margins and yet shaped the center. Eleanor Roosevelt proved that power does not always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears sensible shoes, carries a notebook, and listens more than it speaks. She redefined the role of First Lady, not as a passive partner, but as a quiet engine of progress. Her legacy lingers, not in marble statues, but in whispered inspirations, in the belief that one woman, with courage and compassion, can change the world from within its most rigid institutions. And so, as we gently leave the era of Eleanor, we drift further into the halls she once walked, into the lesser-known corners of the White House, rooms without titles, doors that stayed closed, spaces where stories were never meant to be found. Let us now explore what lies behind the curtains, in the mysterious, symbolic, and emotionally charged heart of the East Wing.
There's a part of the White House that doesn't make it into the postcards. Not the grand halls where presidents take oaths, not the glittering state dining room, and not even the Oval Office that graces the evening news. Instead, we turn our gaze to the quieter wing, the one without the cameras. The wing that, while architecturally modest, has held the whispered secrets and soft footsteps of women who never asked to be remembered, but never quite disappeared. Welcome to the East Wing. Originally constructed during Theodore Roosevelt's 1902 renovation of the White House, the East Wing was meant simply as a formal entrance, a side door with grace. But as the years unfolded, this modest corner of the executive mansion evolved. It became a workroom, a sanctuary, kind of kingdom of paper, perfume, and the sound of quietly shuffled schedules. The East Wing houses the offices of the First Lady and her staff. It is from here that floral arrangements for state dinners are chosen, seating charts agonized over, and speeches crafted that must sound soft but land with elegance. There's a small room for correspondence, a suite for meetings, and a room beloved by many First Ladies known as the Vermeil Room, a space adorned in soft gold and pale pastels, filled with antique silver gilt treasures that sparkle without quite announcing themselves, like the women who chose them. But it's not the rooms themselves that matter. It's what they've held. Many First Ladies have quietly redesigned the East Wing to suit their needs. Jackie Kennedy had a designer's eye and created quiet elegance. Michelle Obama brought color, vibrancy, and modern energy to the space. Laura Bush introduced literary touches and soft Southern flourishes. Even the wallpaper has become part of a whispered tradition.
each First Lady making changes no one outside the house would really notice, but everyone inside would feel. There's a sense that this part of the White House belongs to them, if only temporarily. A soft rebellion against the idea that history belongs to presidents alone. Some First Ladies have created personal rooms for writing, others for reflection. One kept a low, worn couch just outside her office door, a spot where she could rest between appearances, unseen by cameras, but within reach of the phone if the president called. Rumor has it, the phone only rang once, and it was just the chef asking if they preferred peach or apple cobbler. To be fair, if I were First Lady and had an entire wing to myself, I'd also redecorate it every 4 years just to confuse the ghosts. And then there are the letters, tucked into drawers, hidden behind cabinet doors, or locked in private safes. Thousands of them. Notes between First Ladies, unsigned observations, lists of tasks from decades past. Some speak of the exhaustion of public life. Others whisper quiet joy at a small triumph, a successful dinner, a heartfelt thank you from a schoolchild, a single orchid blooming on a windowsill in the middle of winter. Dolly Madison, that endlessly resourceful woman of the early 1800s, reportedly had a fondness for letters written in code, whether it was to avoid scandal or simply to make herself feel like an early American spy, we may never know. But it adds to the strange, tender mythology of the East Wing, a space of formality and fingernail-bitten reality. Some stories suggest that the East Wing also holds unofficial rituals. There is no ceremony, no documented rulebook, but over time, traditions have emerged. A particular mirror where every First Lady, sooner or later, stares at herself and wonders if she's doing enough. A teacup that never gets used but is never moved. And somewhere, probably in a quiet drawer beneath 6 layers of velvet lining, a collection of handkerchiefs with monograms no one can fully decipher. And of course, there's the Rose Garden, technically not part of the East Wing, but emotionally tied to it. The garden has long been a retreat, a place for reflection, and occasionally a scene of quiet drama. Dolly Madison is said to appear here from time to time, though in a very civil, ghostly manner. She never interrupts events, she simply strolls. Imagine being so classy that even your ghost waits politely to haunt only after tea time. Now, let us pause and imagine the daily rhythm inside the East Wing. Picture a morning in the 1960s. The house is awaking, staff moves silently through the corridors. A note is delivered to the First Lady's office, an invitation from the Smithsonian perhaps. There's an upcoming luncheon with visiting dignitaries. A new portrait needs approval. Somewhere down the hall, a faint radio plays a Billie Holiday tune. The First Lady stands at the window for a moment, coffee cooling in her hand, wondering whether her hair will hold in the humidity. It is not a glamorous life, but it is profoundly human. Visitors rarely see this part of the White House. Public tours glide past, focusing on the West Wing, the Blue Room, the famous portraits. But the East Wing remains quiet, perhaps too quiet for a world obsessed with headlines. And yet, it is here that human frailty has been balanced with national responsibility. Here that mothers, artists, educators, and reluctant celebrities have whispered to their aides, "Can I just have 5 minutes?" Or more famously, "Do we really have to do this again?" Somewhere in a drawer of the East Wing, there's probably a "Do Not Disturb Unless It's Pie" sign no one ever dared to hang. While many spaces in the East Wing are meticulously cataloged, others remain enigmas. There are storage rooms with broken lamps from the Truman era, boxes of state gifts, from awkward pottery to questionable modern art. A closet that once held only hats, a testament to another era entirely. But perhaps the most mysterious element of the East Wing is what it doesn't contain: certainty. Unlike the West Wing, with its maps and security briefings and situation rooms, the East Wing is filled with pauses, with choices made in the gray spaces. How should one comfort a grieving widow during a state dinner? What should be said to a child from a war-torn country who comes to visit? Which dress sends the right message to 5 cultures at once? There are no official manuals for such things, only instinct, grace, and the quiet legacy of women who have walked these halls before. In the end, the East Wing is less about architecture and more about atmosphere. It's not about the rooms themselves, but the stillness they offer. It's where women have paced and thought, composed notes with trembling hands, smooth hems before walking into history. A place of both invisible labor and visible poise. It is a wing that holds the quiet weight of expectation and a strange, enduring intimacy with history itself. So as we leave the soft-lit corridors of the East Wing behind, we carry with us the scent of old paper, the echo of whispered advice passed between generations, and perhaps the lingering feeling that history is not only written in grand speeches, but also in handwritten lists, quiet compromises, and the way a woman sits in a chair meant for no one else.
In a country built on democratic ideals, there exists a paradox. One of the most powerful roles in American public life is one that no one votes for, no one applies to, and no one can truly prepare for. It is unelected, unpaid, and at times unforgiving. It does not appear in the Constitution, and yet it has shaped legislation, influenced diplomacy, and sparked cultural revolutions. That role, of course, is First Lady of the United States. Despite the ceremonial title, the position is a potent force of social, symbolic, and political influence. While the president may lead the nation, it is often the First Lady who softens the image of the administration, builds social bridges, and nudges history forward from the parlor, not the podium. From Martha Washington's quiet gatherings to Michelle Obama's global campaigns, the First Lady has long been what one historian called an ambassador without credentials. No army, no legal authority, but influence in spades. Let us begin where so many legacies have quietly bloomed, with a question that haunts every incoming First Lady. What kind of role should I play? There is no job description. Some become hostesses, others reformers. Some choose visibility, others prefer discretion. And yet, regardless of their personal inclination, all First Ladies are expected to represent something larger than themselves: American values, femininity, empathy, grace, and sometimes perfection, a near impossible standard delivered with the bouquet and a press conference. Take Jacqueline Kennedy, for example. With her whispery voice and meticulous French-inspired fashion, she transformed not just the East Wing, but the entire cultural mood of a generation. Her televised tour of the White House in 1962 turned her into a national icon. She didn't speak loudly, but every word was watched, every hemline discussed, every accent mark debated. Jackie once said she wanted to be remembered as a good wife and mother. America heard that and said, sure, but also as a fashion icon, interior decorator, and historic preservationist, if you don't mind. Meanwhile, Betty Ford, who never planned to live in the White House at all, found herself at the center of a social revolution. After surviving breast cancer, she went public with her diagnosis, shattering taboos. Then she did something even bolder. She talked openly about addiction, mental health, and women's rights.
Her honesty humanized the office in a way no press secretary ever could. Nancy Reagan took a different path. Elegant and composed, she wielded enormous influence behind the scenes, often shielding President Reagan from criticism, sometimes even advising staff selections. Her Just Say No campaign became a defining feature of the 1980s, for better or worse. The power of the First Lady is subtle. It's not expressed through legislation, but through visibility, advocacy, and presence. When Rosalind Arter sat in on cabinet meetings, or when Hillary Clinton led a task force on healthcare reform, eyebrows were raised, not because they were wrong to do so, but because they revealed the uncomfortable truth. The First Lady's office had teeth. One reporter once joked that Hillary Clinton was the only First Lady with the West Wing keycard and a to-do list for Congress. Michelle Obama elevated the role into something both maternal and global. With initiatives like Let's Move, she tackled childhood obesity, school nutrition, and health education. But she also delivered searing speeches on race, gender, and American identity, all while maintaining an unshakable smile through public scrutiny that no man in office ever endured quite the same way. There's a duality in the First Lady's role. She must be strong, but soft, visible, but never overbearing, political, but not partisan, a national symbol, but also a wife, mother, hostess, organizer, and sometimes unwilling therapist to a very stressed commander-in-chief. And yet, for all this pressure, the First Ladies have built legacies of quiet influence. Behind almost every major policy moment, every summit, ceremony, and moment of national healing, there was a woman in a gown or a pantsuit helping set the tone, shape the conversation, or decide whether the napkin should be ivory or cream. Let us not forget the social diplomacy. When foreign dignitaries arrive in Washington, it is often the First Lady who offers the warm welcome, a smile in the rose garden, a carefully selected menu, a dress in the color of the visiting nation's flag. These gestures may seem decorative, but they are powerful. They show thoughtfulness, cultural respect, and political subtlety in ways that a treaty cannot. In other words, diplomacy sometimes begins with a teacup, not a treaty. Some say the pen is mightier than the sword. In the White House, it turns out the canapé fork is mightier than both, especially if you can use it to prevent a minor international incident. As we wind down this final segment, we must recognize that the First Ladies have not simply adorned history, they have altered it, sometimes with words, sometimes with silences, sometimes with causes, sometimes with quiet refusals. It is tempting to think of power in purely visible terms: laws passed, speeches given, flags raised. But soft power, cultural power, emotional influence, symbolic presence is harder to trace, yet no less real. The First Ladies occupy this strange liminal space between private life and public duty. They are neither elected nor anonymous. They are insiders and outsiders at once. And in that space, they have forged legacies of enormous consequence. Some remembered, some forgotten, all worthy of reflection. As you drift towards sleep, let this final image linger. A woman sitting alone in a quiet study of the East Wing, a schedule in one hand, a letter in the other. Outside, floodlights gently illuminate the south lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a president gives a speech. But here, in this small room filled with quiet dignity and elegant solitude, history is being shaped with a sigh, a decision, and a kind of power no title could ever name.
Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your marriage is not just personal, it's political. That every photo, every step, every glance exchanged with your spouse will be analyzed, magnified, and archived. The First Lady lives not just with a partner, but with a presidency. And in that arrangement, love becomes a performance.
privacy becomes a privilege, and intimacy becomes complicated. Many First Ladies entered the White House with a deep, lifelong bond with their husbands. Others came in carrying the quiet ache of distance, emotional or even ideological. But all of them had to adjust to the strange geometry of life in the public eye. In the White House, even silence has meaning. Even a smile can stir headlines. Mary Todd Lincoln adored her husband and was one of his most passionate supporters, but she suffered terrible grief and mental anguish, often in isolation, while the nation watched. Her pain was visible, but rarely addressed with compassion. Eleanor Roosevelt, whose partnership with Franklin was marked more by duty than romance in later years, forged her own path, nurturing friendships, writing, traveling, and leading in her own right. Her marriage was not always a source of strength, but her purpose never wavered. Laura Bush brought a quiet steadiness to the presidency, often acting as a stabilizing presence when her husband's approval waned. Her deep love for literature and education became her signature, but beneath that calm demeanor was a woman who endured years of scrutiny, sometimes over things she never even said. It's said that behind every great man is a woman rolling her eyes. In the White House, she's also planning the next state dinner while doing it. Even modern First Ladies, Michelle Obama, Melania Trump, Jill Biden, have spoken in different ways about the surreal disconnection that comes with constantly being seen and yet rarely known. Relationships inside the White House often become more like partnerships in survival. The pressure is constant, the stage is permanent, and affection must be navigated with both authenticity and strategy. For many, love remains, but it must adapt. For others, the distance grows, but the performance must continue. That, too, is part of the invisible labor of being a First Lady, learning to maintain a deeply personal relationship under the cold and unblinking lights of public life. It's no wonder so many of them journaled or walked alone in the garden.
Perhaps the greatest challenge of being a First Lady isn't the pressure of protocol, but the quiet, aching space between public duty and private longing. And when it all ends, when the cameras turn away and the staff clears the china, what remains? Let's turn our thoughts now to the matter of legacy. Not the loud kind, the lasting kind. When the final term ends, when the motorcade drives away, when the lights in the East Wing dim, what remains? For the First Lady, legacy is rarely clear-cut. There are no official metrics, no approval ratings, no historical ranking charts like those made for presidents. And yet, over time, the stories of First Ladies become part of the national memory, sometimes revered, sometimes misunderstood, and often quietly powerful. Their legacy isn't carved into marble, but stitched into fabrics, preserved in museums, and whispered through memoirs. A speech remembered, a garden planted, a cause championed, a room redecorated. Each decision tells a story, not just of taste, but of intention. For example, Claudia Lady Bird Johnson changed the look and feel of the nation's highways and cities through her environmental advocacy. Her Beautify America initiative was dismissed by some as soft, but its impact on urban planning and public spaces lasted for decades. Pat Nixon rarely courted the press, but she expanded the role of the First Lady abroad, traveling extensively and serving as a quiet diplomat in places where official envoys couldn't see or hear things the same way she could. Mamie Eisenhower made pink a national obsession. Rosalind Carter helped destigmatize mental illness. Michelle Obama made school lunches and strength cool. Each First Lady finds her own way to leave a trace. But not all legacies are made of public moments. Some are built in silence. There are First Ladies history nearly forgot. Eliza Johnson, for instance, who was too ill to fulfill public duties during her husband's presidency. Or Jane Pierce, who lost all her children before entering the White House and carried that grief quietly through her time there. They shaped the atmosphere, if not the headlines. Some First Ladies shaped policy behind the scenes, pushing their husbands or their administrations towards specific causes. Others ensured continuity and grace, even during times of national crisis. And still others, through restraint and modesty, taught future generations about the quiet dignity of simply holding space for others. You could say the First Ladies were the original influencers, except they didn't need Instagram filters, just a really strong opinion on China patterns. Their impact doesn't always appear in bold type, but in margins, traditions, and expectations. They set tones, they shape moods, they define what the presidency feels like, not just what it does. And perhaps that's the lasting truth. The First Lady's greatest legacy may not be in what she changes, but in what she preserves, protects, and gently guides. Through grace, through strength, and often through silence.
Their names may not echo through history books the way generals and presidents do, but their echoes are softer, deeper, woven into the fabric of culture and time. And now, as we near the final pages of this quiet story, let us take one last breath beside them. Let us listen for the wisdom they left behind, not in speeches, but in stillness. History often remembers presidents during times of war, scandal, or national tragedy. We recount their decisions, their speeches, their outcomes. But who stood behind them, steady, unshaken, and often unseen? When the nation trembled, the First Lady stood in the East Wing, fielding letters from frightened citizens, comforting military families, or simply trying to hold her own family together. In moments when the president was called commander-in-chief, the First Lady quietly became the nation's comforter-in-chief. During World War I, Edith Wilson stepped in almost completely after Woodrow Wilson's stroke. She was not elected. She had no official title. Yet she filtered decisions, guarded access to the president, and essentially became the gatekeeper of the presidency. Some call it the first female presidency. Others called it reckless. But to Edith, it was necessity. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, Jacqueline Kennedy stood cloaked in blood beside his body, dignity intact. She planned the funeral, led the nation through mourning, and just days later gave a televised interview referring to Camelot, cementing her husband's legacy with grace and myth. While grieving, she built history. Nancy Reagan defended her husband fiercely during the Iran-Contra scandal and later during his battle with Alzheimer's. Her world shrank to care, to memory, and to fiercely controlling his image, a woman at war with time. After the events of 9/11, Laura Bush became a symbol of calm, especially for children and educators. She returned to schools, read stories, and offered quiet steadiness while the world felt like it was on fire. And Michelle Obama, during racial tension and political polarization, bore an extraordinary symbolic weight. As the first Black First Lady, every word, gesture, and silence was interpreted. Her dignity was revolutionary. Her calm was resistance. These moments of national fear or disarray, be it economic collapse, assassination attempts, global conflict, or pandemic, are written in bold in the annals of history. But the First Lady's role in these moments is often a quiet balancing act, holding the country together emotionally, even as she might be unraveling personally. You know things are bad when even the family dog needs a press briefing. And guess who ends up doing it? Not the president. It's the First Lady with a treat in one hand and a talking point in the other. What we don't see are the sleepless nights, the whispered prayers in empty rooms, the long hours waiting for a husband to return from war zones or political firestorms. They didn't always get to scream or rage or cry on camera, but they held the line with poise, pearls, and power tucked neatly beneath a jacket. History remembers what is written. But what about what was worn, hosted, planted, or painted? Let's wander now into the subtler forms of influence, into art, gardens, fashion, and hospitality. You don't need a vote to influence a nation. Sometimes, all you need is a ball gown, a rose bush, and a very particular shade of wallpaper. Welcome to the quieter language of First Ladies, where symbolism whispers louder than any speech. From the moment she first steps onto the national stage, a First Lady is judged not just by her causes, but by her curtains, her hairstyle, the salad fork she chose at the luncheon with foreign dignitaries. Yes, really. You could almost say she governs in accessories. Let's begin in the 19th century, when Dolly Madison was pioneering soft power before the term even existed. Dolly didn't wear power. She draped it. Turbans, flowing gowns, ribbons and ruffles that framed her like a living portrait. She wasn't trying to compete with the European courts. She was the court. While James Madison drafted the Constitution, Dolly drafted the dress code. Her fashion was a statement. America can be elegant and independent. And when the British came to burn the White House during the War of 1812, Dolly stayed just long enough to rescue the portrait of George Washington. And let's be honest, probably checked that her turban was on straight. Priorities. Fast forward to the 1960s, and Jacqueline Kennedy turns the White House into a museum of Americana. She didn't just redecorate, she restored. Antique clocks, gilded mirrors, historical authenticity down to the last doorknob. It was aesthetic, yes, but it was also cultural diplomacy. Jackie knew foreign leaders might forget a speech, but they'd remember the dinner, the paintings, the feeling that America was refined. She curated beauty as a form of national identity. And she did it all while speaking French better than half the French ambassadors. And then there's the garden. Oh yes, let's talk about gardens. Because if you think it's just about flowers, you're underestimating the dirt-level diplomacy of the First Lady.
Lady Bird Johnson launched the Beautify America campaign in the 1960s, planting millions of flowers across highways and urban spaces. Critics said it was fluff, but Lady Bird knew better. Beautification wasn't just decoration, it was environmental policy with lipstick on. She once said, "Where flowers bloom, so does hope." And let's be honest, flowers are also a great way to hide potholes before a motorcade. Then came Michelle Obama, who turned a patch of South Lawn into a symbol of health, sustainability, and community. Her White House kitchen garden wasn't just for show, it was a living classroom. Kids came to dig, plant, harvest, and learn. Presidential carrots, you might say. And yes, she even got Beyoncé to eat kale. That's power. Through every floral arrangement, every centerpiece, every curtain and cufflink, these women sent messages. Subtle, but significant. Every dress was a chapter, every renovation a revision of how the nation saw itself. There's a famous anecdote about Nancy Reagan and her obsession with China. No, not the country, dinnerware. She ordered an expensive new set during an economic recession. The press pounced. Critics accused her of lavish spending, but Nancy stood firm. She wasn't just choosing plates. She was saying, "This house is the nation's home. It should reflect dignity, always." Also, let's be honest, no First Lady wants her legacy served on chipped porcelain. From porcelain to peonies, every detail was part of a larger story, not written in laws, but lived in color and cloth. These expressions, fashion, food, flowers, furnishings, were the soft tools of influence, elegant, strategic, feminine, and yes, often misunderstood. Because being a First Lady means walking a fine line. Too fashionable, and you're frivolous. Too plain, and you're boring. Too outspoken, and you're threatening. Too quiet, and you're irrelevant. But walk that line well, and you shape a nation's self-image without ever passing a single bill. History remembers what is written. But what about what was worn, hosted, planted, or painted? Let's wander now into the subtler forms of influence, into art, gardens, fashion, and hospitality. You don't need a vote to influence a nation. Sometimes, all you need is a ball gown, a rose bush, and a very particular shade of wallpaper. Welcome to the quieter language of First Ladies, where symbolism whispers louder than any speech. From the moment she first steps onto the national stage, a First Lady is judged not just by her causes, but by her curtains, her hairstyle, the salad fork she chose at the luncheon with foreign dignitaries. Yes, really. You could almost say she governs in accessories. Let's begin in the 19th century, when Dolly Madison was pioneering soft power before the term even existed. Dolly didn't wear power. She draped it. Turbans, flowing gowns, ribbons, and ruffles that framed her like a living portrait. She wasn't trying to compete with the European courts. She was the court. While James Madison drafted the Constitution, Dolly drafted the dress code. Her fashion was a statement. America can be elegant and independent. And when the British came to burn the White House during the War of 1812, Dolly stayed just long enough to rescue the portrait of George Washington. And let's be honest, probably checked that her turban was on straight. Priorities. Fast forward to the 1960s, and Jacqueline Kennedy turns the White House into a museum of Americana.
She didn't just redecorate, she restored. Antique clocks, gilded mirrors, historical authenticity down to the last doorknob. It was aesthetic, yes, but it was also cultural diplomacy. Jackie knew foreign leaders might forget a speech, but they'd remember the dinner, the paintings, the feeling that America was refined. She curated beauty as a form of national identity, and she did it all while speaking French better than half the French ambassadors. And then there's the garden. Oh yes, let's talk about gardens, because if you think it's just about flowers, you're underestimating the dirt-level diplomacy of the First Lady. Lady Bird Johnson launched the Beautify America campaign in the 1960s, planting millions of flowers across highways and urban spaces. Critics said it was fluff, but Lady Bird knew better. Beautification wasn't just decoration, it was environmental policy with lipstick on. She once said, "Where flowers bloom, so does hope." And let's be honest, flowers are also a great way to hide potholes before a motorcade. Then came Michelle Obama, who turned a patch of South Lawn into a symbol of health, sustainability, and community. Her White House kitchen garden wasn't just for show, it was a living classroom. Kids came to dig, plant, harvest, and learn. Presidential carrots, you might say. And yes, she even got Beyoncé to eat kale. That's power. Through every floral arrangement, every centerpiece, every curtain and cufflink, these women sent messages. Subtle, but significant. Every dress was a chapter, every renovation a revision of how the nation saw itself. There's a famous anecdote about Nancy Reagan and her obsession with China. No, not the country, dinnerware. She ordered an expensive new set during an economic recession. The press pounced. Critics accused her of lavish spending. But Nancy stood firm. She wasn't just choosing plates. She was saying, "This house is the nation's home. It should reflect dignity, always." Also, let's be honest, no First Lady wants her legacy served on chipped porcelain. From porcelain to peonies, every detail was part of a larger story, not written in laws, but lived in color and cloth. These expressions, fashion, food, flowers, furnishings, were the soft tools of influence, elegant, strategic, feminine, and yes, often misunderstood. Because being a First Lady means walking a fine line. Too fashionable, and you're frivolous. Too plain, and you're boring. Too outspoken, and you're threatening. Too quiet, and you're irrelevant. But walk that line well, and you shape a nation's self-image without ever passing a single bill.
Curtains fade, flowers wilt, and fashion moves on. But the influence of a First Lady rarely stops at the White House steps. It lingers in daughters, institutions, and unfinished causes. Some legacies are passed through law, others through blood. But in a world of First Ladies, legacy is often invisible until you follow its echo. Consider the daughters. They weren't elected either, but they were watched. Every dress they wore, every date they attended, every awkward wave from the south portico balcony. It was all part of the stage, and for many of them, that spotlight never dimmed. Alice Roosevelt, daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, was practically a political comet. She smoked cigars, carried a snake in her purse named Emily Spinach, true story, and once buried a voodoo doll of her father's political rival in the White House lawn. A reporter once said, "She was the only creature in Washington whom everyone feared and adored." When asked why she did what she did,
Alice famously replied, "If you don't have anything nice to say, come sit next to me." Ah, the original tea spiller. But she wasn't just entertaining, she was influential. Alice attended world summits, charmed foreign leaders, and shaped public opinion without ever holding office. She was a proto-first lady in pearls and mischief. Then there's Caroline Kennedy, daughter of Jockey and JFK, whose grace and public service later carried on in her own diplomatic career. She became the U.S. ambassador to Japan, continuing her family's connection to international affairs and proving that elegance and intellect could live side by side across generations. Or Patty Davis, daughter of Nancy Reagan, who went the other direction, becoming a vocal activist and writer, often at odds with her parents' politics. But even in rebellion, there's reflection. Patty once said, "She was shaped by the ghosts of corridors where my mother once ruled with lipstick and iron gloves." Poetic, and also possibly a little terrifying. Legacy can also be ideological. Lady Bird Johnson's highway beautification projects planted not just flowers, but environmental awareness, especially in southern states. Today, those same stretches of land are protected green zones, wildlife corridors, and rest areas filled with bluebonnets and borrowed hope. And Rosalind Carter, who championed mental health awareness long before it was popular or politically safe, laid the groundwork for conversations we now consider essential. Her legacy? Every hotline, every open-door clinic, every person who now feels less alone in their silence. Betty Ford may be best known for a rehab clinic, but her impact goes deeper. She made vulnerability powerful. She talked openly about her mastectomy, about addiction, about mental illness. She made pain visible, so others could face it without shame. Someone once said, Betty Ford did more with honesty than most presidents did with speeches. It's funny because it's true and maybe just a little sad. Then there are the first ladies whose legacies were carried not through family, but through followers. Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign continues in schools and kitchens across the country. Kids who grew up planting White House vegetables are now nutrition advocates, urban gardeners, and community organizers. Eleanor Roosevelt's relentless advocacy for human rights still echoes through the work of the United Nations and every grassroots activist who dares to speak softly and act boldly. And Hillary Clinton, who began as a first lady, then became a senator, secretary of state, and nearly president. Her journey redefined what could come after the East Wing. You could say Hillary's resume looks like she kept saying one more thing for 3 decades straight. Many first ladies wrote memoirs, but more interestingly, some of them wrote policies, drafted speeches, and built behind-the-scenes alliances that never made it into official records. They were remembered as hostesses, but in truth, many of them were the strategic hearts of political empires. And the echoes go beyond Washington. Across the world, first ladies or their equivalents have followed the American mold in both form and rebellion. Peng Liyuan in China, a former folk singer turned soft power icon, or Brigitte Macron in France, reshaping age expectations in public life, or Evita Peron of Argentina, who went from actress to political lightning rod, adored and vilified in equal measure. The role of a first lady may not be defined in any constitution, but its ripple effect crosses oceans, generations, and ideologies. These legacies don't fade when the next administration rolls in. They live on in schools, in hospitals, in parks, in court rulings, and yes, even in the quiet gestures of daughters watching their mothers from the wings of power. Someone should really write a law. With great pearls comes great responsibility.
Every legacy begins in admiration. But admiration is a delicate thread, and in public life, threads snap easily.
Being First Lady is like walking a tightrope over a roaring stadium. If you smile too much, you're fake. If you don't smile enough, you're cold. If you speak out, you're too political. If you stay quiet, you're useless. And above all, no matter what, you're never just right. Welcome to the paradox of public womanhood at the highest level. Let's go back to Mary Todd Lincoln. She was accused of being too extravagant, too emotional, too unstable. Historians now believe she may have suffered from depression and grief so deep it warped her public persona. But at the time, she was simply labeled hysterical. Of course, in the 19th century, hysterical was code for a woman who's inconveniently upset about things that actually matter. Even as her husband guided the country through civil war, Mary was battling wars of her own, gossip columns, morning gowns, and relentless social expectations. She redecorated the White House and was slammed for spending too much. She hosted too few events, then too many. Even her grief for her lost son was considered a nuisance to national morale. Fast forward to Jackie Kennedy, who captivated the world with her elegance. But behind the soft voice and perfectly arranged hair was a woman walking through fog. She lost her infant son while in the White House. She endured her husband's infidelities in silence. And after his assassination, she had to plan a funeral that would be broadcast around the world while keeping her 2 children calm, all without a single crack in public. Later, she was mocked for marrying a Greek tycoon, Aristotle Onassis. Critics said she'd sold out, as if grief had a rule book. Pat Nixon was criticized for being too quiet. Betty Ford was criticized for being too open. Nancy Reagan for her astrologer. Barbara Bush for her pearls. Apparently, in the eyes of the media, First Ladies must be the perfect combination of therapist, nun, model, diplomat, and mind reader, with a little stand-up comedian thrown in for charm. Hillary Clinton perhaps faced the fiercest scrutiny of all. When she tried to reform healthcare, critics told her to go back to the China pattern books. When she didn't, they accused her of running a shadow presidency. One journalist joked that if she'd found the cure for cancer, the headline would have read, "Hillary Clinton ends cancer, but did she violate protocol doing it?" She was accused of being too ambitious, too cold, too involved. And yet her eventual run for president was built upon the very political spine she was once criticized for possessing. Michelle Obama was adored for her style, grace, and strength. But she also became the target of some of the most vicious racialized commentary of any First Lady in modern U.S. history. She was mocked for her arms, her garden, her initiatives, and even for promoting healthy food. There was a moment when some folks were genuinely angry that she wanted kids to eat more vegetables. That's when you know politics is broken, when broccoli becomes a national threat. Melania Trump had a very different challenge, being a first lady to one of the most polarizing presidents in modern U.S. history. She was frequently criticized for being too aloof, too distant. The Be Best campaign was mocked, even as she tackled online bullying in one of the most toxic political climates imaginable. Then came Dr. Jill Biden, the first lady to hold a full-time job outside the White House. She continued teaching while attending state dinners, supporting military families, and navigating yet another divided America. Some applauded her. Others said she was neglecting her duties, by having a life. The truth is, first ladies are often caught in a no-win situation. Too visible, she's overstepping. Too quiet, she's irrelevant. Traditional, she's boring. Modern, she's threatening. And in all of this, they're unpaid. No salary, no job description, no elected mandate. Just expectations. So many expectations. They become symbols, and people don't like when symbols behave unpredictably. But of course, they're not symbols. They're people. People with pasts, beliefs, grief, health concerns, marriages, ambitions, and private sorrows. Yet they carry the burden of appearing calm, pleasant, elegant, and purposeful at all times, even during war, even during scandal, even during personal tragedy. Because the cameras don't blink, and neither, it seems, does public judgment.
You've seen the glamour. Now let's step into something quieter, more echoing. Because behind the chandeliers, sometimes there's only silence. From the outside, the White House seems alive. Alive with energy, with news, with history being made. But for first ladies, it could feel deserted. A hollow mansion with too many clocks ticking and not enough genuine voices. Your days are scheduled, but not always purposeful. Meetings, teas, photo ops, but no clear mission. You aren't elected, you weren't hired, and yet you're expected to be flawless at everything. You live in the public eye, and yet you're profoundly isolated. Even early first ladies felt this. Louisa Adams, born in London, missed her home and identity. She once said, "I feel like I live in a land that is not my own." And the more public she became, the more private her grief grew. Caroline Harrison, during her husband's presidency in the 1880s, lost her daughter to tuberculosis. But even then, she was expected to continue hostess duties. The state dinners did not wait for mourning. More recently, Rosalind Carter wrote in her memoir, "There are so many people in the White House, but sometimes it was the loneliest place I had ever been." Even the first ladies with children often struggled to find companionship. The demands of protocol, the formality of staff relationships, it could feel like swimming in a social ocean where everything is perfectly polished, but no one really sees you. Some first ladies talked to the furniture more than the press. At least the chairs didn't write editorials. To pass time, many turned to hobbies: needlework, reading, quiet walks inside protected courtyards. Jacqueline Kennedy would disappear for hours into books about French art. Laura Bush found solace in her love of literature, running a book club. Some wrote secret journals. Others rearranged decor just to feel like they had a say in something. And yet, the emotional cost of always appearing composed is immense. Even when hurting, they had to show up, smiling. Even when anxious, they had to stay graceful. Being First Lady means never letting the country see you in sweatpants, even during an existential crisis. But even in this silence, some First Ladies discovered quiet ways to wield extraordinary influence, not with titles, not with votes, but with timing, tone, and presence. The First Lady has no constitutional role, no defined powers, no salary. And yet, time and again across generations, they've shaped nations. And they did it without ever being elected, without podiums, without debates, and often without permission. In politics, power is usually loud. It thunders in speeches, crashes through lawmaking, and broadcasts itself in headlines. But in the East Wing, it sounds different. There, influence often arrives in whispers, in dinner conversations, in careful letters, in the timing of a smile, or the deliberate withholding of one. Let's begin with one of the boldest examples. Edith Wilson, the unofficial president. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke. His left side was paralyzed, his vision impaired, his speech fragmented. And yet, the public didn't know how bad it was, because his wife, Edith, made sure they didn't. She quietly stepped in as the gatekeeper, screening documents, deciding who could see her husband, summarizing memos, and sometimes issuing responses in his name. Some historians call it devotion. Others call it a shadow presidency. Whatever the label, Edith Wilson became the most powerful woman in America without ever taking an oath. Technically, she didn't run for office, but she did run the country, with excellent handmanship. Nancy Reagan, the power behind the persona. Fast forward to the 1980s. Ronald Reagan had a clear public image. Charming, grandfatherly, full of classic one-liners. But behind the curtain was Nancy Reagan, a figure of immense influence, cloaked in elegance. She advised on staff reshuffles, speechwriters, wardrobe choices, and even diplomacy optics. When she felt someone in the administration was bad for her husband's image or health, they quietly disappeared from his inner circle. After the 1981 assassination attempt on Reagan, Nancy became intensely protective. She even consulted an astrologer to help guide the president's schedule. An eccentric move, yes, but in her eyes, it was an act of love and prevention. Forget the CIA briefing. First, they had to check the stars. Mr. President, Mars is in retrograde. Cancel the summit. Michelle Obama. Gardens, health, and cultural revolution. Michelle Obama approached the East Wing with her own strategy. She wouldn't tackle bills, she'd tackle culture. And that can be even harder. Her Let's Move initiative wasn't just about childhood obesity. It was about redefining health, food access, exercise, and even family meals across the country. She planted a garden on the White House lawn. Simple, symbolic, and radical. That garden made vegetables cool. It appeared in magazines, classroom posters, school lunch policies, and grocery store partnerships. She knew she'd be watched, so she made the watching count. She danced with Ellen, she hugged children on talk shows, and she stayed composed in the face of relentless criticism from both sides of the political aisle. But behind that calm demeanor was a strategist, a lawyer, and a woman who knew exactly what stories she wanted the country to tell about itself. And through it all, she shifted the idea of what a first lady could be without giving a single campaign speech. Hillary Rodham Clinton, the policy partner. Then there's Hillary Rodham Clinton. Before she ever ran for Senate or president herself, she was redefining what it meant to be a first lady with real political muscle. She was the first to have an office in the West Wing, where executive decisions happen. She helped shape healthcare reform proposals in the 1990s, attended policy briefings, and sat in on high-level advisory meetings. The backlash was intense. Some said she was too involved, too political, too ambitious. And perhaps she was all those things, but she was also effective. Behind her sharp suits and equally sharp mind, she knew the cost of being the wrong kind of first lady, but she also knew the price of wasting the seat she'd been given. She may not have had a cabinet title, but let's be honest, Hillary was the PowerPoint queen of the White House. Dolly Madison,
the original architect of social power. But to truly understand the art of First Lady influence, we must travel even further back, to the early 1800s, to the woman who set the entire tone. Dolly Madison, wife of James Madison, was not content to simply host teas. She invented the modern political salon, intimate gatherings where diplomats, senators, journalists, and military leaders could speak candidly, over dessert. She decided who sat next to who was seen together, who got invited back. In a time when women couldn't vote or hold office, she created the only political room that really mattered, one built on subtlety, on charm, and on knowledge. She once said, "It is one of my sources of happiness never to desire a knowledge of the secrets of others." But the truth is, Dolly often knew them anyway, because she listened, and she remembered. A pattern of silent strategy. Over time, the First Lady position evolved from hostess to strategist, to advocate, to silent partner. Some used fashion as diplomacy. Others championed literacy, civil rights, or education. Some pushed presidents in private. Others shaped the mood of the nation from the shadows. But the tools remained the same. A well-timed dinner invite, a softly worded speech, a symbolic choice of cause, a disarming smile backed by decades of quiet preparation. The public rarely sees the influence in action, but you can trace it in softened policies, shifting narratives, and changed hearts. Being First Lady is not about declaring power. It's about using visibility to steer emotion, using kindness as leverage, and knowing that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who never speaks first.
So here we are, once more, at the threshold of the East Wing. We've wandered through quiet corridors lined with portraits that rarely blink back, peeked into letters meant to be forgotten, and listened to silences louder than any applause. The First Lady of the United States, a title without oath, without pay, without a single written rule, yet wrapped in expectation, tradition, and the gaze of an entire nation. Perhaps when you first heard the phrase First Lady, you imagined pearls, parties, glittering gowns beneath crystal chandeliers. But behind those chandeliers were sleepless nights. Behind every wave, a hidden weight. Because power doesn't always look like power. It can arrive in softened words, in meals planned with meaning, in knowing when not to speak. When Eleanor walked through coal towns, when Betty Ford opened her wounds to heal others, when Michelle grew vegetables in defiance of cement, when Hillary stood firm beneath fluorescent lights, they weren't just wives. They were mirrors, sometimes windows, and often quiet architects of change. Their strength wasn't declared, it was lived. And in that space between visibility and invisibility, they shaped the tone of an era. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavier, imagine the hush of taffeta brushing against old wooden floors, the soft light of the East Garden, the faint scent of roses carried on dusk air, and a woman at her desk, pen paused, thinking carefully about a message the world may never read. Because history isn't just what's written, it's what's carried, endured, refused, and quietly rewritten by those never handed the pen. And if nothing else, let this truth gently settle in your thoughts. Behind every great man,
is a woman surviving 10,000 opinions and a state dinner with undercooked lamb. So now let the lights dim in the hallways of your mind, let the echoes fade, and slip gently into sleep, knowing the past is rich with quiet revolutions, carried out in heels, grace, and unwavering patience. Thank you for walking slowly through history with me. If you enjoyed this quiet journey, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly feel at home here. I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to share the time and place you're listening from down in the comments. It's always comforting to know where these stories are finding their rest. And when the world feels heavy again, I'll be here with another hidden chapter waiting just around the corner. Until then, rest well and good night.